I'll be discussing very basics of chest radiography in the 45 minutes to 60-minute time. It's very difficult to cover the whole of the chest radiography, but some of the essentials of the chest radiography I'll be covering. And before going into the lecture, I'll be showing some cases, and what is the abnormality? So on the chest X-ray, first of all, I would like you people to spot the abnormality. I don't expect the diagnosis, but at least what is abnormal on the chest X-ray? I mean, first of all, we should try to make out whether this chest X-ray is normal or abnormal. So this chest X-ray is very pertinent in the present time. So what we are seeing some haziness in the outer portion of the middle and lower zone bilaterally, and this kind of geographical increased opacity area on chest X-ray is called consolidation. Okay, so okay, let me start again. So this is a chest X-ray, and what is abnormal here? So as we can see, there are areas of increased opacity in the outer portion of the middle and lower zone, both sides. So a kind of geographical area of increased opacity. We also describe it as radiologically as a consolidation. So bilateral peripheral consolidations, and this chest X-ray is very pertinent in today's time. This is a case of COVID pneumonia. Another chest X-ray, what is the abnormality here? We see lot of crisscross lines. And this pattern is described as reticular opacities. So we are having lot of crisscross lines in the chest X-ray, and the common cause is interstitial lung disease. I'll be going into that in further detail, but I'm just showing some interesting cases before getting into the talk. What is the abnormality here? We see multiple small nodules scattered over both lung fields, and these nodules are not having any predilection for fissures or for subpleural location. Almost all areas of the lungs are equally affected. This is an example of miliary opacity. A classical example is miliary tuberculosis, although some other cases like fungus and some rare kind of metastasis can also produce similar picture, but the classical example is miliary tuberculosis. So now I'll be going into the talk. So what is a chest X-ray? Basically, in chest X-ray, we put the patient between an X-ray tube and a receptor or the cassette, and we expose the patient with the X-ray beam. The X-ray beam passes through the body, and depending on the attenuation of the X-rays, a shadow is produced. And this shadow is made up of multiple shades. Some are blackish, some are whitish, some are grayish. So depending on what structure the beam is penetrating, whether the beam is penetrating the lung, the beam is penetrating the bone. So different opacities appear on the chest X-ray depending on the anatomical organ. And a very common terminology which we use on chest X-ray is the radiolucent and radiopaque. So anything which is more blackish is radiolucent. Anything which is more whitish on chest X-ray is radiopaque. So this is a very common terminology which we use on chest X-ray. Now coming to the Röntgen opacities, there are 4 basic Röntgen opacities. One is the air opacity. Air opacity is the black opacity, which we can see on this chest X-ray, like the lungs and the air around the body. These are blackish areas. They are produced by the air. As you know, air offers very little resistance to the X-rays. X-rays pass easily through these structures, and they produce a black shadow. Whereas if we see the bone or the metal, these structures are very dense structures. They stop the X-rays or they absorb the X-rays, and a whitish shadow is produced where these structures are, like the bones. We can see the bones, especially the cortical bones. Now some of the organs like heart, liver, these organs, they are of water density. I'm not saying they are entirely of water, but in front of X-ray they behave like water, and they produce they also produce a white kind of opacity, but not that dense of bone or metal. So this is a soft tissue or water opacity. So these solid structures like liver, liver, heart, they produce soft tissue opacity. And fat, although fat is fat is solid compared to the water, but it offers less resistance to X-ray compared to the water, and it is more lucent than the water or the solid organs. So fat is grayish in shades. In some of the areas, we can see fatty shadow here in between the muscular planes, not everywhere. So fat is somewhat grayish. It's not totally black, but it is grayish. So these are some of the basic opacities on the chest X-ray. Now, coming to the technique of the X-ray, very brief about this. So in the patients who are able to walk, who are able to sit, we always prefer a PA view film. And in PA film, this is called posterior anterior film. The X-ray beam is directed from behind, and the cassette is in the front of the patient. And we ask the patient to take deep inspiration and hold the breath in the deep inspiration. And this X-ray is called PA film, PA view erect film. And this is the ideal film. But lateral view also, nowadays we don't do that much lateral films, because now CT scan is available, and if we see any abnormality on a PA film, we always go for CT scan rather than going for lateral view. In the past, this view was more commonly taken. Now, especially in sick patients or the ICU patients, these patients cannot sit down. They are mostly in the lying position. So we can't take this PA film, PA erect film. So mostly a AP anteroposterior supine film is taken, and the cassette is placed behind the patient, and the X-ray beam is focused from the front. Now this film compared to the PA film has certain disadvantages, like the heart and the great vessels, they appear magnified. The clavicles are projected higher, scapula sometimes overlies the lungs, ribs appear horizontal. But still, it provides useful information in these sick patients, and we have no choice but to do this kind of supine films in the ICU settings in the sick patients. Now, coming to the reporting part or the interpretation part, before going into interpretation of individual organs, we should try to see some of the technical things on the chest X-ray. And most important of it is identification and the date. So you should first always match whether the X-ray belongs to the patient by comparing some CR number or some unique ID number. And also the date is also very important. So we try to see if there are multiple X-rays. It's always a good idea to see them in a chronological orders, and then only you will be able to appreciate the changes which have happening over time. Now, coming to the technical things is the marking, whether the right and left is marked correctly or not, whether the X-ray has been done in adequate inspiration is not. I mean, some of these points will not hold, will not apply to the sick patients or the ICU patients who are unable to take adequate inspiration, but at least in the patients who are like walking and talking, they can do where we can get a good inspiratory film. So after seeing the marker, we see for whether the X-ray has been done in the adequate inspiration or not. Then we see the rotation. I'll be explaining further about this, centering and the exposure. So these are some of the technical things on the chest X-ray, and we should see whether the quality of X-ray is good or not by seeing these technical parameters. After that, everybody should develop its own algorithm or a paradigm how he is going to interpret the chest X-ray. Some people prefer to go from center to outside. Some people prefer to see the X-ray from outside to inside. So this is, you should develop one way, but at least everybody should try to make some protocol so that he may not miss important things, and he or she has paid attention to each and everything on the chest X-ray. So now this is one scheme which I am following, but everybody can develop their own pattern or their own scheme. So first I see the trachea, then I see the heart and mediastinum, hilum, lung and hyla, pleural recesses, diaphragms, below diaphragm, bones, soft tissue and hidden areas, some of them I'll be showing them. So first thing I'll be talking about the exposure. So exposure is the adequate amount of the radiation. So everybody is having a different body habitus. Some people are thin, some people are obese. So every patient needs adequate exposure depending on his body habitus, and then only we'll be getting a good quality X-ray. So here are three X-rays. The top X-ray is of a good quality, and how we tell that both lungs are nicely seen, and the penetration is good means the intervertebral disc spaces are visible only through the top half of the heart shadow, but not visible in the lower half. Whereas the bottom X-ray, one of them is underexposed, means although the lung is seen, but everything else is totally wide out. No details can be obtained about other things. And the another one on the bottom is totally blackish. It is overexposed. More amount of radiation has been given, and lungs are totally blacked out. No details can be obtained about the lung. So an adequate exposure is very important. Now coming to the effect of inspiration. So first of all, how we look at the inspiration. So if there is a chest X-ray, so we either count the anterior rib or the posterior rib. If we are counting the anterior margin of the ribs, then at least we should see 5 to 6 ribs above the diaphragm. Okay, then only we can say this is a adequate inspiratory film. If we are counting the posterior margin of the ribs, like these are the posterior margin of the ribs, then at least 9 to 10 ribs should be visible above the diaphragm. Then we can say that this X-ray has been taken in adequate inspiration. And this X-ray is this X-ray of the same patient, but here the inspiration is inadequate. So you can see the heart appears magnified. In the lower zones, there is some haziness, which we might misinterpret as some consolidation. The pulmonary vascular markings are quite prominent. So it is important to obtain a good quality inspiratory X-ray. Now coming to the rotation. Rotation means whenever the patient stands, the cassette should be equally touching the both right and left side of the body. If the patient is somewhat oblique or tilted, then one lung may appear more lucent, the other lung will appear whitish, one hyla may appear small, the other hyla may appear large. So both sides of the body should be in proper contact with the cassette without any rotation. And how we see the rotation? Generally, we see a midline structure like the spinous process. We see the spinous process of the vertebra, and we see the medial margin of both the clavicles. So on both the side, the distance should be equal. Then we can say that there is no rotation. However, in the lower X-ray, there is gross rotation. One side of the clavicle is far away compared to the other side. So again, this can lead to misinterpretation. And this thing about magnification, as I already mentioned, that in ICU or settings in sick patients, generally anterior-posterior X-rays are obtained by a portable machine. And here there is a magnification of the heart and vessels. So the mediastinal structures appear about 15% wider or 50% magnified compared to the PFL. So this is important whenever we are commenting on cardiomegaly on a AP film. Now coming to the interpretation part, as I already mentioned, that everybody should develop its own unique scheme or unique pattern of seeing everything. So I am going from center to outside. Somebody might prefer to go from outside, like soft tissue, then chest wall, then inside. So it's your preference. So first structure, I'll be seeing the trachea. Normally, trachea should be in the midline, and it divides at the carina, which is almost at the level of T4 or 5 vertebra. Or if you see the ribs, then at the level of the sixth rib, posterior margin of the sixth rib. Trachea may be slightly on the right side because of the aortic arch, but there should not be significant deviation of the trachea. And of course, before commenting on the tracheal deviation, we should see whether there is rotation or not. So if there is a rotation in the film, then trachea might appear deviated. And some of the important causes of tracheal deviation are like tumor, pneumothorax, major atelectasis. So these are the causes of mediastinal shift, and they can also cause tracheal deviation. After seeing the trachea, we can see the heart. So heart, in addition, there are two things we see in the heart. The first thing is the size of the heart, and another thing is the morphology of the heart. That is also important. So in the heart, we see the size. So normally, a heart should be less than 50% of the internal thoracic diameter. There are some exceptions like in neonate and athletes. And in the serial films, especially in ICU patients, if on serial radiography, there is an increase in the diameter of the heart by more than 1 centimeter, that can also be considered as a cardiac enlargement. So this is how we see the diameter of the heart. So we take the widest diameter of the heart, that is heart width, and then we take the internal thoracic diameter, the maximum thoracic diameter inside the ribs, inside the margin of the ribs, and we take this as an internal thoracic diameter, and the heart width should be less than 50% of this internal thoracic diameter. Now, after seeing the heart, then we see the hilum. So what is hilum? Basically, from the heart, the major pulmonary vessels, that are pulmonary arteries and veins, they supply the lung. So they form opacity in the center part of the lung. These are called hilum, and the main components of these hilum are pulmonary vessels, bronchi, and some lymph nodes, which are usually small, not large. And usually the left hilum is slightly higher than the right hilum, and they are usually equal size and equal density, and outer margin of the hilum should be concave. So these are the features of a normal hilar shadow. I'll be talking about abnormalities later on. Now, after seeing hilum, we see the lung and the pulmonary vasculature. So in the lung, we see both the lungs. We see presence of any nodule, any opacity, anything abnormal in the lung. And in addition, we see these pulmonary vessels. So in some conditions, these pulmonary vessels may be prominent, may be dilated, and some of the way by which we can tell, like in the peripheral 1/3 of the lung field, in the outer 1/3 of the lung field, normally we should not see any vascular markings. Another way of telling is that in the first intercostal space, if we see a vessel more than 3 millimeter diameter, that is also suggestive of dilated pulmonary vascular markings. In addition, we can also see the diameter of the right descending pulmonary artery, and normally it should be 10 to 16 millimeter in males and 9 to 15 millimeter in females. So now, so far we have seen lungs, pulmonary vascular markings. Then we see the costophrenic angles or costophrenic recess. Seeing this recess is very important because in case of pleural effusion, normally in erect patient, the pleural fluid collects here and it causes blunting of the CP angle. So that is also very important to comment on the CP angle. After seeing the CP angle, that is costophrenic angle, we see the diaphragms. Normally the right diaphragm is slightly higher than the left diaphragm. In most of the cases, sometimes they are at equal level. So if there is any discrepancy of more than 3 centimeter in both the diaphragms, that suggests an elevated diaphragm, and we have to investigate that, what is the cause of that. Now, in addition to the diaphragm, we also have to look below the diaphragm for any abnormal air shadow like pneumoperitoneum or any abscess or absence of normal gastric bubble, and for any abnormal calcification. So we also have to look below the diaphragms. Now, after seeing all this, things inside the bony cage. We also pay attention to outside the bony cage. And what we have outside, we have these ribs, the clavicles, scapula, and the soft tissue, that is chest wall and breast shadows. So we also pay attention to these things. Sometimes there may be bony lesion, like in this case, you can see there is a lytic expansile bony lesion involving one of the ribs on the left side. This is a case of fibrous dysplasia. So once in a while in chest X-ray, you might see some bony abnormality also. So it's a good idea to pay attention to the bones as well. And in some time, patients have mastectomy. So those observations also have to be made. Now, there are certain areas on the chest X-ray which are described as hidden areas. Why these are called hidden areas? Because these areas are usually congested. These areas have a lot of overlapping shadows, and abnormalities may be missed inside in these areas. So it's a good idea, after you have reviewed the chest X-ray, pay a second look, give a second look, and pay attention to these hidden areas. And these hidden areas are the apices. So we should look carefully in the apices. There are a lot of bones overlapping over here. And you also know that tuberculosis is very common in this location. So we should pay attention to the apex around the hila. In hila, usually there are a lot of vessels. So sometime opacities may be missed. In the retrocardiac location, part of the lung is not visible because of the heart, but you can have subtle signs of abnormality if you look carefully over the heart shadow. And also under the diaphragm. As you know, that diaphragm is not the lower limit of the lung. Lung goes way beyond the diaphragms, because the diaphragm is a dome-shaped structure. So a good amount of lung parenchyma is hidden behind the diaphragm. So we should also try to look behind the diaphragm. Sometimes lung opacities may overlap with the diaphragm and can produce opacity over that. So these are the hidden areas, and we should pay attention to these areas. Now I'll be reviewing the normal anatomy, whatever we have learned so far. So as I told you, we see the trachea. This is the central lucent tube, and it divides at the carina. Then we see the mediastinum. In the mediastinum, we have the heart. This is the heart shadow. Then we have the aortic knuckle, aorta, and from the mediastinum, both sides, we have hila. Hila are pulmonary vessels. So we have right hilum, left hilum. As I mentioned, both hilum should be of equal size, equal density, and the outer margin should be concave. Of course, the left hilum may be slightly higher than the right hilum. Then we see the lungs. We see both the lungs and the pulmonary vessels in the lung. We also pay attention to the costophrenic angle on both sides. Then we see the level of the diaphragms, the right diaphragm, the left diaphragm. Then we see the areas below the diaphragm for presence of any abnormal air shadow, to look for the normal location of the stomach fundus or the gastric bubble. And then we pay attention to the bones which are visible, like the vertebra, the ribs, the clavicle, the part of the humerus, the scapula, and the soft tissue shadow of the chest wall, that is the muscles and subcutaneous tissue of the chest wall. So after reviewing all this, we can say we have completely evaluated a chest X-ray. Lateral film, as I told you, nowadays very less commonly obtained because of the availability of the cross-sectional modalities like CT scan. However, if we have a lateral film, at least we can make out that the anterior-most part of the sternum, this bone is the sternum, and the posterior-most bony structure visible are the vertebrae and some of the posterior margin of the ribs. And in between, we can see this shadow, anterior shadow, a large shadow. This is produced by the heart. And from the heart, we can see the aorta, arch-like tubular structure from the aorta. And then we can also make out bronchi and the hilum. And lower down, we can see both the diaphragms overlapping over each other. And of course, the rest of the lucency is formed by the lung parenchyma. So this is how we can look at the lateral film. However, very infrequently it is obtained nowadays. Now coming to some of the abnormalities. So on a chest X-ray, either we have a abnormality which produces decreased lucency, decrease its opacity, means more lucency, or it may cause opacity, means more increased whiteness. So like in this example, what we see, there are a lot of lucent areas in the chest wall. In the chest wall, we can see a lot of mottled kind of lucencies which are extending into the neck along the lateral chest walls. Even we can see fibers of the pectoralis muscle. So this kind of appearance is seen in cases of subcutaneous emphysema, usually secondary to trauma or secondary to chest tube insertion. So sometimes we see it in ICU setting or in trauma settings. So this is an example of subcutaneous emphysema. Pneumothorax, a very important entity. And what we see in pneumothorax, of course, lung is also air-filled structure, and pneumothorax is also a pneumophile abnormality. So sometimes the difference is not that obvious. So we have to look carefully. What we see, we can see a very thin outline of the lung, because when the pneumothorax collects, it pushes the lung medially, and we can see a very thin margin. And if we pay attention to the pulmonary vessels, these vessels don't cross this line, and they don't cross and go into this area of pneumothorax, because this is the margin of the lung. So that is how we can comment on the pneumothorax. And of course, if the pneumothorax is very large, it can cause collapse of the entire lung, depression of the diaphragm, and may produce a tension pneumothorax kind of picture. But as you know, that when we have the supine film, these findings on which are very simple to interpret on erect film, they are very difficult to interpret on a supine film, because on the supine film, the air collects anteriorly. The air does not collect laterally and pushes the lung medially. Here, rather than collecting laterally, the air collects anteriorly, and posteriorly we have an inflated lung. So the vascular markings are seen through this area of increased lucency. Like in this case, the only finding is that there is increased lucency over the right lung compared to the left lung, and we can see these pulmonary vascular markings, because here the air is collected only anteriorly. So there are some subtle signs to detect pneumothorax on supine film. Of course, nowadays people have learned doing ultrasound on the chest, and they can make out the difference between a normal lung and pneumothorax. But some of the important findings are, one I have mentioned is the increased lucency of the involved site. And we can also see there is a deep sulcus sign, that is the claustrophrenic angles appears quite deep on the affected site. There is increased sharpness of the diaphragm and the lung, and sometimes you might have a double diaphragm sign because the anterior claustrophrenic sulcus may be visible, or the right diaphragm may be depressed somewhat. So these are the subtle signs, and the diagnosis of pneumothorax on a supine film is not that straightforward. So it's important to have a high degree of suspicion in these cases. Now, similar to the air, sometimes pleural fluid collects in the pleural cavity, like in cases of pleural effusion or in cases of empyema. And once we have like 200 ml of fluid, then only the CP angle blunting is appreciated on a PA or epi film. If the amount of fluid is like 50 to 100 ml, it's very difficult to detect on chest X-ray. However, ultrasound can detect them easily. But to detect pleural effusion on a chest X-ray, at least 200 ml of fluid is required on a PA or epi film. Then only it will produce blunting of the CP angle. So the acuteness of the CP angle is lost here. However, as the fluid increases in amount, it produces opacity. Like in this case, we have increased density over the left lower zone, and this margin of the fluid, as it merges with the lateral chest wall, it forms a meniscus or a rounded shape rather than a totally horizontal shape. So this is a appearance of the pleural effusion on a erect film. Now again, on the supine film, if we have effusion, it does not produces opacity like that of the erect film. Here again, what we see, there is increased haziness over the middle and lower zone on the both lungs, and there is no increased opacity in one area and meniscus formation. So supine film are really difficult, and here the pleural effusion will layer down on the posterior part of the lung, behind the lung, rather than collecting in one area, and only the only sign will be a slight increase in haziness on the chest X-ray. Sometimes this effusion may be loculated, like in cases of empyema and loculated effusion, and they will be producing opacity, which are pleural-based opacities or the chest wall-based opacities, and they can also be seen. Now coming to the collapse. Collapse is a very important entity, and if you are not familiar with it, they are difficult to diagnose. What happens once the lung is collapsed? It occupies a very small place. Like in this example, you see the entire right upper lobe has collapsed, and there is only a small opacity in the right upper zone, which is based towards the mediastinum, and rest of the hemithorax is filled by the other lobe. So the other lobe develops compensatory overinflation, and it fills up the rest of the space. So collapse actually the collapsed lung just occupies a very small place. So it does not produce a big opacity. Okay. Like in this case, this is an example of right upper lobe collapse. Here, there is a wheel-like or wedge-shaped opacity, which are overlapping with the heart. So behind the heart, we have a triangular opacity, and this is the collapsed left lower lobe. The entire left lower lobe has collapsed and occupies a very small space, and rest of the hemithorax is filled by the overexpansion of the left upper lobe. So this is a collapse of the. So in individual lobar collapse, generally you will not appreciate that much mediastinal shift. So until unless like there are more than one lobes are affected on the same side, you won't appreciate mediastinal shift and marked increase in opacity. Now coming to the consolidation. So in opposite to collapse, in collapse the lung loses volume. In lobar consolidation, the lung retains its volume, and the alveolar spaces are filled by some material like fluid or pus cells or blood or tumor cells. So in consolidation, the lung volume is maintained. The alveolar spaces are filled by fluid, exudates, blood, tumor cells, and they will produce opacity. So in this case, what we see, there is an increased opacity in the right upper zone. So this is a consolidation of the right upper lobe, because right upper lobe occupies most of the lung in this portion. In addition, you might also see air bronchogram. So what happens, although the alveolar spaces are filled by some material, the airways may be patent. There may be air in the airways which might produce linear lucencies. So these linear lucencies, like in this case, we see a lucent linear marking. These are called air bronchograms. So air bronchograms are sometimes seen in cases of consolidation. And again, consolidation may be lobar, means it might occupy one lobe, or in some time the consolidation may be patchy. It might be involving both lungs in a patchy fashion rather than a lobar fashion. And in this case, what we see, there are multiple small patches of increased opacity, and although we can say them nodule, but the outer margins are not well defined. They are very fluffy kind of opacities, and in some places these opacities, they coalesce, means they join each other and they form a bigger opacity. And this is a kind of this pattern of consolidation we label as alveolar infiltrates, and it can be seen in cases of bronchopneumonia and some of the other entities also. So consolidation is not always lobar. It can be in a form of alveolar infiltrates as well. So as I mentioned that the cause may be inflammatory exudate, blood, aspiration of the gastric content, water in case of pulmonary edema, proteinaceous material in case of ARDS, and rarely tumor cells also. So there are many causes of consolidation, and you should not think that consolidation is always because of the infection. Infection is of course the most common cause of consolidation, but non-resolving consolidations which are persisting for long, you should also consider other things. Sometimes even malignancies can appear as consolidation. Now coming to the interstitial infiltrates. So what are the interstitial infiltrates? Generally we have two kind of interstitial infiltrates. One is the reticular opacities. The first example I have shown, where we have, I think the second slide. So we have this multiple linear opacities. So they are formed by the thickening of this our interlobular septa and this interstitium, and they produce lot of crisscrossed lines, mostly seen in case of interstitial lung disease. And sometimes we can also have nodules superimposed over these reticular opacities, and then we call it as reticulonodular opacity. Okay. So then we call it as a reticulonodular opacity, and the causes are like in sarcoidosis, we have both nodules as well as linear opacities. Like in case of lymphangitis and sarcoidosis, silicosis, we have a combination of nodules and interstitial markings. So then we call them as reticulonodular opacities. In this example, we have some nodules and some reticular markings, and this is an example of reticulonodular opacities. Now, another abnormality, sometimes we have these rounded areas of opacities, and if they are smaller than 3 centimeter, we call them as nodules. If they are larger than 3 centimeter in size, we call them as masses. So there are many causes of these opacities, nodules and masses, ranging from benign tumor, benign entities to malignancies. So I'll not be able to go into the detail of the causes of these nodules and masses, but some of these nodules and masses, they may cavitate. The internal part of this opacity may liquefy, and you can cough out this material, and only the wall of the, then it forms a cavity, and only the wall is opaque. Like in this case, only the wall is opaque, the internal part has become lucent. So we have this abnormality also, like cavity, nodule, and masses. Now coming to the pulmonary edema, again in pulmonary edema, there are many causes, and not all things you will see in a single patient. This X-ray is an example of acute pulmonary edema. This pulmonary edema has developed over a short period of time. So we see a lot of these patchy opacities in the perihilar region, or in the central part of the lung. Whereas other findings, what we see more commonly in pulmonary edema is the prominence of upper lobe veins. So these pulmonary vessels, pulmonary veins, which are supplying the upper lobe, they become prominent, which we also call this finding as cephalization. There can be lot of lines which are curly A and curly B lines. So curly B lines are multiple horizontal lines which are due to congestion of the lymphatics. I'll be showing you some example of curly B lines, and this wall of the bronchi, they also appear thickened, which are called peribronchial cuffing. And you can also have pleural effusion and lung opacities, like one florid example I have shown you in this case, but you won't find a similar picture in all cases. Very rarely you will have this kind of perihilar opacity in case of pulmonary edema. Mostly you will have this cephalization and this crisscross lines, curly B lines. So these are curly B lines. You can see small horizontal lines touching the lateral chest wall. These are due to congestion of the lymphatics. These are curly B lines, and the wall of the bronchi may appear thickened. This is called peribronchial cuffing. So these findings you may also see. Now coming to the ARDS. So ARDS also produces consolidation by filling of the alveoli by proteinaceous material, but there is a pattern of appearance of these opacities, and there is a typical setting. These patients are sick ICU patients, and there are many causes of ARDS, but these opacities start developing gradually. So initially you will have some patchy areas of the increased opacity, and over a period of time, most of the lung will be white out. So this is a typical pattern of the ARDS, and there is a progression of the ARDS depending on which phase of the ARDS you are dealing with. Like in this case, you have bilateral lungs almost white out. Now coming to the some of the causes of hilar enlargement. So we can have unilateral hilar enlargement or bilateral hilar enlargement. Most common cause of unilateral hilar enlargement is a neoplasm, sometimes because of the tuberculosis also. Sarcoidosis classically produces bilateral hilar enlargement. Very rarely it can produce unilateral hilar enlargement. Other causes of bilateral hilar enlargement are lymphoma, again because of the lymphadenopathy. Sometimes if the film is not taken in proper inspiration or the film is expiratory, again the hyla appear prominent, and hyla may also appear prominent in case of pulmonary hypertension. So these are some of the causes of bilateral hilar adenopathy. Now coming to the lines and monitoring, as you people are dealing with a lot of sick patients, and there are a lot of devices which are put in these patients like chest tube, endotracheal tube, Ryle's tube, tracheostomy tube. So in addition to seeing the abnormalities, it is also a good idea to check at the position of these lines and monitoring devices. So what happened in this case, the X-ray is not very clear, but let me explain. The endotracheal tube has been inserted too far and it is going into the right bronchi. So what's happening? Only the right lung is aerated. The air is not entering into the left lung, and the left lung is totally sort of collapsed and white out. So the endotracheal tube should be 2 to 5 centimeter above the carina, or in the neonates it should be at the level of the clavicles. Similarly, tracheostomy tubes should also be 3 to 5 centimeter above the carina. Like in this case, this is the tracheostomy tube, this is the lower end of the tracheostomy tube, this is the carina. So it should be 2 to 5 centimeter above the carina. It should not be going too much deep, too much down. Nasogastric tube, it's very important to verify the position of the nasogastric tube, because many times we give feed through this tube, and if the tube is in incorrect position, then the patient might aspirate. So the nasogastric tube should be properly in the stomach. It should not be in the airway, or it should not be in the upper esophagus. Like in this example, the tip of the tube, it is going towards the right side. So there's no way esophagus does not courses in this way. Esophagus goes straight down, and before joining the G junction, it turns to the left and then joins the stomach, and then you have the stomach fundus. So the Ryle's tube should come straight overlying the vertebra, then it should turn to the left side and should be lying in the stomach somewhere here. It should not be going on the right side. Central catheters, I think you people must be knowing better where it should be. Some of the examples which I have, I'll be showing, but I don't know that much. There are so many types of central catheters nowadays being used. But this is a central line. So normally it should be kept at the junction of SVC with the right atrium. So it should be in the SVC at the level of the carina. It should not be too much into the heart, neither it should be too much high up. So it should be almost at the margin of the SVC with the right atrium, approximately at the level of the carina. So I'll be summarizing my talk. I have covered some of the very basic aspects of how we interpret the X-ray, how we take the X-ray, what are the fallacies of the X-rays in ICU patients, what are the difficulties of recognizing pneumothorax and pleural effusion in supine film, and there are many different kind of opacity. So we should be familiar how consolidation looks like, how atelectasis looks like, how reticular marking should be looks like, how miliary opacity should look like, what are different types of nodules and masses, and what is the appearance of pneumothorax, pleural effusion. So these are the common things, and we should obviously review it. So to summarize, chest radiograph is an important tool in managing critically ill patient. And although a limited information is obtained, but it is still a good quick test to detect abnormality. And sometimes CT, of course, gives us a lot of information, but we can't get the patient down to the CT every time, and there is an associated radiation exposure. So X-rays are, at least, even if not fully diagnostic, they can be very helpful in following these patients. And we should try to identify the pattern of abnormalities which I have mentioned. So if we know the pattern, then we can give a differential diagnosis. Like if there is a consolidation, then we know that this may be infection, this may be aspiration, this may be ARDS. So there are some important causes we can narrow down our differential. So thank you very much.